Good evening. My name is Debbie Regal, and I am Jewish National Fund USA's Assistant Vice President of Small Communities. We are really grateful to have you here with us tonight from Jewish communities all across the country during the darkest time Israel has seen for generations. It is inspiring to see you all coming together to help bring light into the world and to help support our friends and family in Israel.
התחלתי
Many of
להקשיב
you
לזה, סליחה.
Many of you may be hearing about JNF USA's Small Communities Department for the first time. So I'd like to quickly tell you a little bit about what we do. The mission of Small Communities Department is to work at the grassroots level in small Jewish communities throughout the United States to increase JNF USA awareness, cultivate new partners, and find new leadership in our Small Communities Committee. Our lay leaders and professional team actively engage with our partners in small Jewish communities to provide opportunities for Israel education and advocacy and investment in JNF USA projects in Israel. As the challenging situation in Israel continues, the work of JNF USA has become increasingly important, both on the ground in Israel and here at home. In Israel, the list of needs gets longer every day: shelter, food, clothing, activities for children, civil defense equipment, therapy for an entire country. Here at home, we're standing up to a wave of anti-Semitism online and on campuses, more intense than any of us ever imagined we could see in our lifetimes. So I thank you again for joining us, because your engagement and your support in these times is all the more important and all the more appreciated. And now I'd like to introduce Rick Krosnick, Chief Development Officer for JNF USA, to share with us a little bit about how we are facing the challenges and meeting the needs of Israelis during this crisis. Rick?
Deborah, thank you so much. It's good to be with everybody. And first off, let me just say thank you all. Thank you. Thank you for joining JNF. Thank you for being part of our army to support the people of Israel during these darkest of hours. Within hours of the Hamas infiltration of these Gaza border communities in the Western Negev, within hours, Jewish National Fund USA established an operations center to coordinate our activities. Nobody told us to do it. Nobody directed us to do it. We just did. We just did. Within hours, we were mapping out available housing opportunities because we knew that families had to be evacuated. We identified bus companies that could move people very rapidly in large numbers. Nobody asked us to do it. We just did it. We mobilized our partners and affiliates in Israel to start finding bedding, pillows, personal care items, because these families were leaving literally with the clothes on their backs. Nobody asked us to do it. We just did it. We just did these things because that's who Jewish National Fund is. We are these communities that we're talking about along the Gaza border, and so many others are communities that we indeed help to establish. When you stroll through these communities, the very homes that have been destroyed, shot up, people killed in these homes are homes that we help build. The sidewalks we help to pave with your dollars, with the dollars of your parents and your grandparents. This is who we are, and this is what we do. So for us, this has been very, very personal. It's very personal. These are our family members. When we take missions to Israel, and please join us in Israel at some point, come with us. When we go, we are sitting in the living rooms and in the back patios of these families, drinking coffee with them. We get to know them. This is very personal for us. If you received the e-blast today, this afternoon, you're getting a daily email, you can see our impact by the numbers. In the email you got today, we talk about 25,000 people that we are directly impacting, but our reach has felt even greater. Just over the last week, we were moving bomb shelters up into the north and into other areas, like into Arad and Yerucham, where they don't have bomb shelters. Nobody asked us to do it, other than our partners on the ground, the mayors, the communities with which we work so closely, so closely. I just have these very short few minutes to share this message with you. But if you take away one thing about your affiliation with Jewish National Fund, your support of Jewish National Fund, you are part of a family that goes back generations. Generations. Our hands are steeped in that soil. This is our land. These are our communities. These are our family. I want to thank all of you for the support that you've given us thus far. And I'm here to tell you, we're going to continue to call on you. We don't know how long this is going to last. This hot war is going to last. But long after the last bullet is fired, after the last missile is taken down by an Iron Dome, we are going to be there to help repair lives, repair broken families, and indeed repair homes and communities. We are going to be there for however long that takes. So we will be calling on you again. So it's not an apology from me because we are going to ask. It's a rallying cry to all of you, to stay with this army that needs us so desperately, because this is what we can do. This is the only weapon that we have. We have our voices, and we've got our checkbook, and we need both of them. Deb and Ann, thank you so much for the time, and I appreciate it very much. Thank you all.
Thank you, Rick. Hello, everyone. My name, excuse me, is Ann Zinman, and I'm JNF USA's National Vice President of Small Communities. It's heartening to hear about the outpouring of support the land and people of Israel are receiving through JNF USA's Israel Resiliency Campaign. To date, JNF USA supporters from your small Jewish communities have raised nearly $500,000. With that said, it's my honor to introduce one of the foremost thought leaders in the Jewish and Zionist world. Dr. Rachel Fish is a celebrated academic with 20 years of experience in Israeli history, Zionist thought, and Middle Eastern studies. She is the co-founder of the Boundless Israel and previously served as executive director of the Foundation to Combat Anti-Semitism and is a senior advisor and resident scholar, Jewish Israel Philanthropy at the Paul E. Singer Foundation in New York City. Dr. Fish also served as the executive director of the Schusterman Center for Israel Studies at Brandeis University and held the Rohr Visiting Professorship at Harvard University, where she received the Derek Bach Certificate of Teaching Excellence. She is co-editor with Alon Torin of the book Essential Israel, Essays for the 21st Century. Dr. Fish, thank you for being here with us tonight. If you have questions for Dr. Fish, please be sure to drop them in the chat to JNF USA. There will be time for a question and answers after the presentation. And with that, I'd like to ask Dr. Fish, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Ann. Thank you to JNF. I feel your extended family in many ways. I know many of you personally and professionally. I have deep connections and a long relationship with Russell, and he has been a part of my own professional growth since I began working. So it truly is a pleasure to be with you all this evening. And I know that it is hard for many of us to feel like anything feels pleasurable these days, as we carry a lot of heaviness in our hearts. As Micha Goodman recently said on a podcast, we have a cocktail of emotions that we feel pretty regularly as we walk through our moments day to day. I want to tell you that why I wanted to speak with you all this evening, and it's quite personal, and it is because of where I grew up. I grew up in the foothills of the Smoky Mountains in Northeast Tennessee. I am one of those small communities. And as growing up in a small community, I learned at a very young age what it meant to be different. My siblings and I had to learn how to articulate who we are, what we believe, why we believe what we do, and why it is different from those surrounding us, particularly in the foothills of the Smoky Mountains. And my parents modeled for us at a very early age what it meant to be able to walk around in the world with a strong sense of identity rooted in our Jewishness and our particularism. They cultivated in us an operating system of that Jewishness, and that is how we saw the world. That is still how we see the world, while also recognizing that we have a responsibility to the larger society in which we live. And it was always that healthy tension between particularism and universalism that guided our interactions, our relationships. And for me, professionally, it has been very much my North Star. So that is important for you all to understand, because like many of you, and I know it's a different time than when I grew up, it was not like the Northeast Corridor, which is where I live now, where the options of Judaism and Jewish life overflow our cups every day, and we are blessed for that. But I know that that is not much of America, and I don't take for granted where we live here. And at the same time, there is something about growing up in a small community that absolutely defines your identity in a way that I do not think if I had grown up in the Northeast, I may necessarily feel the same as I do and who I am today. So that was very important for me to tell you. Originally, when Dove and I spoke and we talked about, and others and I talked about what I'd be presenting today, it was very much focused on anti-Semitism and understanding anti-Semitism. I bet for many of you, you didn't imagine we would be living in a moment in time in which you were seeing in the newspapers, hearing on the news, seeing in your social media feeds, hearing from your children and or possibly grandchildren, what is actually happening in the American context in terms of the way in which Jews have become quite targeted. We could not have imagined that this would be the reality. And yet I want you to know that what we are seeing and experiencing did not begin on October 7th. It did not begin on October 8th. And I don't come to tell you a negative, dismal narrative, but I do think it's important to understand that what is occurring today in America, all the more so for each of you who live in these small communities, you need to be able to explain this to your friends, to your neighbors, to your colleagues, so that they understand what it actually means to feel Jewish in a society that in some ways feels as if it has abandoned some of the essence of its democratic roots, its liberal roots, its shared values. Much of the anti-Semitism that we are seeing at this moment is an anti-Semitism that I dare say many, both Jewish and non-Jewish, didn't have language to label, did not have language to identify, and did not necessarily know how to articulate this form of Jew hatred. I know that some of you may have heard me in the past speak. The reason I use the term Jew hatred is based upon research that I had conducted in collaboration with others several years ago, where we asked 13 to 35-year-olds across America, demographically representative, what is anti-Semitism? And when we asked them what is anti-Semitism, the majority responded by saying IDK, I don't know. We then heard from some, well, what's a Semite? Very fair question. It's an odd term, one that you don't hear all the time. But we also heard the following. I'm anti-racist. I'm anti-homophobic. I'm anti-Islamophobic. So I must be an anti-Semite. And we were like, no, you're an anti-Semite. But even the construct of the word is quite hard for many to grasp. When we tested language around Jew hatred, it was clear that a younger audience understood it much more deliberately. They understood what it meant, and they understood its directness. Now, the term Jew hatred is not actually a new term. The term Jew hatred is a term that was originally used in Germany. It was Judenhass, hatred of Jews, or Jew hatred. It was not until 1879 when a German, Wilhelm Marr, actually coined the term Antisemitism, and he did that in order to make it more politically correct, more palatable in the context of German society. Judenhass was crass. It was direct. I think we are at a point in time in which we need to be crass and direct. I do not think that we should be hiding what anti-Semitism is, which is why I use the term Jew hatred, so that it is very clear to those around me, especially those who are what I refer to as the don't knows. And we need to educate and to sensitize these don't knows in order for them to be able to move in a direction in which they do want to distance themselves from those who are flirting with, engaged with, or actually advocating a particular form of Jew hatred. What you all see happening, particularly on college campuses, but not exclusively, I have to tell you, it's also happening in many middle schools and high schools across this country, independent schools, sectarian schools, public schools. What we are seeing is that a Pandora's box has been opened, one that allows for those who believe that Jews have no right to exist, one that articulates a position that says the Jewish state ultimately has no right to exist, which means the annihilation of the world's largest Jewish population, that Jews have no right to self-determination, and in many ways, that Jews may not even belong in the communities in which many of us live. That's very hard. It's hard for us to hear. It's hard in terms of the reality that we see playing out. And it feels, maybe perhaps by some, that this came out of nowhere. In the American context, we are quite aware of and able to identify the Jew hatred that exists on the hard right. When we saw in Charlottesville men walking around with tiki torches, carrying Confederate and swastika flags, chanting, "Jews will not replace us," we understood what it meant immediately. Because we know the historical legacy, and we know ultimately the history of white supremacy in this country, and the roots of fascism and Nazism, and the way in which Jews could never be white and were always the other in the context of Germany. But what we see right now, which has been under the surface and for sure has been percolating, especially in intellectual elite institutions of higher education, is a form of anti-Semitism that ultimately also emerges. And when it emerges, it uses the language of human rights discourse, but weaponizes that language in order to bludgeon the state of Israel and all those who support her. In Boundless, we did research in May of 2021 during the conflict between Israel and Hamas. When we looked at the research, we were focused on what was happening in terms of the warfare between Hamas and Israel's retaliatory responses. And we looked at its relationship to the way in which the discourse online, on social media, was impacted. And you quickly saw a shift from the discourse being about Israel to the discourse being about Jews. It was no longer about what was happening in Israel with Hamas, but now the discourse was Jews are committing an ethnic genocide. Jews are ultimately colonialist settlers. Jews support an apartheid state and perpetuate an apartheid state. We then looked at the language from that and its relationship to the real world violence that was taking place in America in terms of many of the social justice movements out in the streets. If you recall, in May of 2021, remember what happened when there were social justice movements that proclaimed to be fighting for the rights of those who needed to be liberated. And in those same protests, you then had Jews being assaulted. If you remember, on Wilshire Boulevard, cars coming down the street, careening down the street, those cars would then have individuals yell out with their faces covered that we're hunting the Jews, find them, kill them, wherever they are. We saw the same thing in the suburban streets of London. This was not about a nuanced discussion about where the Green Line should be. This was not a nuanced discussion about whether or not Israel should continue a policy of settlements. This was not a discussion about dealing with issues that are very real within Israeli society between the Jewish majority and its minority populations. This was an exhibition of hatred towards Jews in the context of America. Within the universities, much of the intellectual framework that has permeated the fields of the humanities, history, sociology, anthropology, comparative literature, those intellectual frameworks have put forth a particular perspective, and those particular perspectives have become the primary lens through which to refract all ideas. These ideas include things like post-colonialism, postmodernism, which says ultimately that there are no objective truths, there are no objective facts, and narratives weigh much more than facts ever will. All facts can be debated. Ideas put forth by Professor Edward Said, who is a professor of comparative literature at Columbia University, who wrote the book Orientalism in the late 1970s, who ultimately said that you may not, if you are not native to that region, criticize or critique what is happening in that society, because if you do, you are imposing your own Western values. So let me just give you a very concrete example that doesn't have anything to do with Israel. When we saw in parts of the Arab world and in parts of Africa controlled by a small group of Muslims who ultimately then ran a tyranny in some of those countries, and they were engaging in practices of female genital mutilation, you did not see feminists in the West up in arms. They were actually quite silent. That's a form of Orientalism. There are also ideas like post-nationalism that says all nation states cause the problems that exist in the world. And if you take it to the next step, the idea is a form of Marxism, that those who are strong need to be weakened and those who are weak need to be strengthened. If you combine all of these intellectual factors and you transpose issues related to race, black, white, one skin color in a superficial manner, then you have the following perception. Jews are viewed as being part of the white majority and are not understood to be a minority. Therefore, Jews, as an extension of Israel, are imperialist and colonialist. They benefit from forms of white supremacy. Zionism is a form of white supremacy. And Zionism seeks to displace the native, dark-skinned indigenous population in the region. It is a very simplistic and superficial equation. And yet, it has become a reigning framework for much of what happens in the academy. I need you to understand this because it didn't begin just recently. These ideas were formulated and advanced through a process of area studies in the 1960s, compounded by Arab money coming from dictatorial regimes who literally bought our institutions, bought who would be teaching in the class, and not just teaching on campus, but through public outreach initiatives that train kindergarten through 12th grade educators, who would then receive materials, take those materials into their own classrooms, many of whom did not understand what they were doing, but did it because it had the seal of approval from major institutions like Harvard, Georgetown, and Columbia. This is a problem that has been impacting America for quite a while. And only now do we see what happens as these issues no longer remain under the surface, but rather boil way beyond the pot and are spilling into the streets. When I began to raise these issues about 20 years ago, there were many leaders, Russell was not one of them, but there were many others who said, don't worry about it. What happens on campus stays on campus. And there were even very important Jewish philanthropists. When we shared with them what Jewish students were experiencing, they felt more of an allegiance and a desire to be affiliated with their alma mater than they did to support the Jewish students. And in some cases, they would even say, these kids need thicker skin. These kids don't need thicker skin. These kids need grown-up support. They need the grown-up support to invest in ensuring that they have the education before they ever walk onto a college campus, to know the history of Israel, to experience Israel, to be in relationship with Israel and with Israelis, which I know through much of the work of the Jewish National Fund, you do, and particularly with the Alexander Muss High School program. Not every student has access to that. And we have to find a way to invest much more in order to ensure that more students can have that type of program and that type of education. We also need to make sure that our educators, particularly those in Jewish educational environments, have the capacity in terms of the knowledge and the context and the confidence to be able to teach our children. Because our children need to understand the history and understand the way Israel and Israeli history intersects with Jew hatred at various moments in time. Not always, but in this moment, it does. A lot of individuals have asked me over the years if I believe anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. And of course, I can tell you that there's a whole history around ideas associated with anti-Zionism and the way in which even Jews who hold anti-Zionist positions ultimately don't necessarily make them Jew haters. But what I hope you understand in terms of what we are seeing today, it is not a nuanced discussion about the contours of anti-Zionist positions. What you are seeing today playing out is not at all a critique of Israeli society. The starting point is, does Israel have a right to exist? And the answer is no. That is anti-Semitism. There is no way at all for me to think of it as anything other than that. And that form of hatred has to be addressed by university administrators who are held accountable to ensure that Jewish students are not living in environments that are ultimately hostile to their identities. I cannot say that more clearly. This is a moment in time that we are living that is actually a significant moment in Jewish history, let alone Western civilization. This cannot be the world our children and our grandchildren inherit. It is up to us, and I truly believe that now is the time to ensure that we remain a stiff-necked people. We talk about it on our holidays. We talk about it on Yom Kippur. Stiff-necked is a positive attribute in many ways. And right now, we need to be stiff-necked. We need to demonstrate perseverance and grit, the way in which we see Israelis demonstrating perseverance and grit. For 10 months, we saw in Israel a very fractured society. We saw people from different ideological backgrounds, religious experiences and practices, political positions, really arguing and fighting out in the streets. And sometimes it was peaceful and sometimes it was quite ugly. And yet Israel was still solidly a democracy, even with those serious challenges. Now, those issues do not at all, they haven't at all been resolved. Those issues remain. And even those issues remaining, even despite that, Right now, they are sublimated. They are put to the side. And they are put to the side in order to demonstrate solidarity. The solidarity that is needed to ensure, just like you heard earlier from Rick, that what's happening in Israel is finding a way to ensure that 200,000 displaced Israelis from the south of Israel have places to stay, have homes and shelters they can live in, have access to education for their children, are receiving the social and emotional supports they need from trauma experts and professionals. We see Israelis from the north taking buses to go to the south in order to tend to the fields and the crops of the Israelis who cannot be there at this time, to milk the cows, to pluck the fruit, to make sure that the flowers are pruned. What we see happening in Israel at this moment is an increased desire to ensure that the kind of terror that happened on October 7th is permanently eradicated. It is our job as American Jews to support Israel in that endeavor and to not at all diverge from it. And at the same time, what you see here in America is that those Jews who stand up for a strong Zionist state will be targeted. And you have to understand you will be targeted. And it is up to each of us and our non-Jewish neighbors and friends to understand what is happening in the world and ultimately what is at stake. So I want to just make sure that you all know I am speaking to you clearly from the depths of my heart. I have not stopped since October 7th speaking. I am teaching in every possible environment you can imagine, from public schools to independent schools. I am convening university administrators in mid-November at Brandeis, which we had already planned at Brandeis University, to educate them, to sensitize them, to teach them about their responsibilities in order to ensure their Jewish students and their Jewish faculty are safe. And I'm talking about physical safety. I am working in order to help Jewish communal professionals have the knowledge that they need so that they can provide the support to the communities that they work with. And my colleague Aviva Klompus from Boundless is working tirelessly to ensure that we understand how to talk about these issues in order to reach larger communities and communities outside of the Jewish community so that they understand what is happening, the terror that exists in Israel, and the terror that has the possibility to come to America should we not address it here and now. So I ask each of you, whatever your day job may be, consider this your additional job. Find a way to be as involved now more than ever. Reach out to communities beyond your own in order to teach them and share with them, humanize for them who Jews are. Make sure that they understand that there are hostages that are still being held in Gaza who must be released. Children, women, mothers, elderly. Bring and consider bringing Israeli voices into your communities. Create opportunities in public spaces to show and demonstrate the pain and the destruction that has occurred through artworks and exhibitions. But make sure right now that you feel like you have a second job so that when you look yourself in the mirror at night before you go to bed, you can honestly say you have done everything you possibly can. It's not a choice not to. I'm like legit getting emotional, but it's truly not a choice. And so I see you all as folks who are on the front lines, and just know that you have JNF beside you and you all know where to find me. So I'm happy to be helpful in any possible way. I'll hand it back to you all, and I'm happy to take questions.
I hardly know where to start, Rachel. And I can vouch for Rachel when she says she's been speaking everywhere, because I think this is maybe the third or fourth time we've seen each other since October 7th. So, but let's start with, I guess, the first question. Can Can you speak a little bit to the situation at Harvard with the Wexner Foundation and which has spread now to Penn, and what you see as, the impact that this may have on policymaking at the university levels?
Sure. I don't have any insider information, so I want to be clear about that. I do not represent any of these institutions, the Wexner Foundation, Harvard, any of them. So I'm just going to speak from the position in terms of observing and understanding how the systems within higher education function. It truly matters to all of these institutions, as they are corporations, that they receive serious support philanthropically. They need philanthropic dollars. Those philanthropic dollars are used for a variety of purposes. So specifically, Deborah, the example you asked about in terms of the Wexner Foundation, the Wexner Foundation has supported a very specific program at Harvard Kennedy School. That program does a few things. One, it would bring Israelis for about a year and a half to the Kennedy School. These are individuals who usually have high-ranking positions, whether in government, military, certain sectors of business and education. And they would study at Harvard with the leading academics and with peers in order to be able to take the education that they receive and apply it in a very practical manner to their work when they return to Israel. It's a very prestigious program. Many Israelis apply. It is sought after by many. And it has been a very rewarding experience for many Israelis, not only because of their experience at Harvard, but it's really an opportunity for them to get to know the American Jewish community and get to understand how the American Jewish community functions. The Wexners decided with that particular program that they would be pooling their funding and not bringing Israeli students anymore, because of the inability of Harvard Kennedy School and the academics who are there, who would not ensure that they could create an environment that wouldn't be hostile to Israeli students. Again, this problem did not begin on October 7th. I can tell you that I have worked with Israeli Wexner Fellows for years, and I saw the writing on the wall and shared and expressed that several times to individuals who are associated with the foundation. It is important to understand that it takes time for some individuals and organizations to understand what is actually happening. The Wexners now understand. So they have pooled their funds. I think that it really matters that Jewish philanthropists recognize that they cannot allow their dollars to be hijacked and not be held and not hold those universities accountable when they are receiving significant funds from the Jewish community in order to engage in a very nuanced and academic way. And yet Jew hatred is emerging and has emerged. I do want to add one piece here. I do not necessarily think, however, that we should be pulling students from every single Jewish student from every single university, meaning this is not just a Jewish problem. You do not want academics educating an entire group of students, undergrad and graduates, most of whom are non-Jews, in a similar way, because then you have citizens of this country and global citizens who will have this particular worldview and orientation, which will be very problematic long-term in terms of how they vote, thinking about issues related to foreign policy. So you can't completely cede the space, which is why we need to work on the system from multiple angles, top down and bottom up. We need to make sure that university administrators are better equipped and have the ability to identify Jew hatred and have the tools in their toolkit to know how to navigate it. We also need university leaders who demonstrate moral clarity and moral courage. And we need to expect that and demand that of them.
Okay, another question along the lines of what you were speaking about is, what can college parents do to support our students?
I actually have an idea for those of you who live near universities, even if you don't have any students or children connected to that university. I would encourage each of you to reach out to the Chabad or the Hillel on that campus, ideally both, and find out what those Jewish students need, because what they need right now is grown-up support. They need a home-cooked meal. They need to be invited into grown-ups' homes. They need to be seen in some ways as doing really hard work right now, which is standing up for Israel in a space that is extremely hostile. You have to understand, on some campuses, and it's not every campus, it is on a lot, but not every single campus is burning. But you need to know that there are some students who don't want to walk across the campus quad because they are a target. There are some students who are tucking in their Magen David or taking off their kippah because they don't want to be a target. There are some students who post on Instagram or TikTok all the time. They are now a target. There are some students who are sitting in classes that have nothing to do with Israel, with the Middle East, and the professor chooses to use that classroom as a bully pulpit and promote a clear politicized agenda in statistics class, in media classes. Those students feel targeted. So I highly recommend you reach out to organizations on campus and ask them, what can we do to help Jewish students on campus here and now? For those who do not necessarily have a campus near them, and if you have family members in a university or a college, find out what is the position of that university in terms of, did they denounce Hamas? Did they condemn terrorism? Find out what the leadership is actually saying. Find out if there are student organizations that are promoting genocidal chants and perspectives on that campus that are supported and receive dollars from the university from student activities fees. These are things that you can do. You do not need to be an investigative reporter to do it. You can pick up the phone, you can call, you can search the websites, and make sure that you see what's happening in student press. The student press can be quite vitriolic, and see if there are ways to bring through different student groups on campus that you may have access to other voices to expose students so that they are not only hearing a one-sided perspective on these issues.
So another question, what reactions are you getting from your audiences in terms of your presentations and your action items?
I think, Deborah, I'm getting a positive response from most of the audiences. Within the Jewish community, I think that there's a need to give language to so much of what we've been sharing tonight. And I hope I'm doing my part in providing some of that language and some of that thinking and understanding. I think for Jewish students, I know and feel who they are deeply. I had my own experience as a graduate student, and so I come to this absolutely understanding the position they are in. And I spend a lot of time with students in order to support them, because I once needed a grown-up and now I am the grown-up, and I would never, ever want to shirk that responsibility. I feel a very deep sense of responsibility and intention in that way. I will say that some of the harder conversations are educating non-Jews in this moment, particularly younger non-Jews. First of all, we're a society in general that lacks a lot of global literacy. The younger you go, also, the more you lack understanding around media literacy. And when we live and see kids living on social media, we need to help them hone their critical thinking skills so that they have the ability to really pause and ask, where is this coming from? Who created this? Is there a specific motivation or call to action? Is this even from a credible source? Was this doctored filtered, and it's hard for individuals to know. I mean, we know now already that 1 in every 4 social media accounts that's putting out content that's pro-Hamas is coming from Iran. So how are kids supposed to know that? So that requires real work and effort. I would also just add one other piece, which is I think that teachers, particularly teachers who work in non-Jewish environments in middle school and high school, who want to do the right thing, who want to actually teach this subject, feel that they are damned if they do and damned if they don't. And they also are terrified of being canceled by their own school. And we have to find the right outlets for those educators to receive and actually have a reorientation in terms of the education that they need, so that they understand how to even begin a conversation with students who can't even find Israel on a map, let alone create the brave spaces that are needed in educational environments to lean in with curiosity, even if it's really hard and really hard questions. And we need more people who know how to do that and can do that and will do that.
So I think we've got one more question and then we're going to let you go. One of the glimmers of light in everything that has happened in the last month has been the outreach from the non-Jewish community supporting and touching base and reaching out to some of us to see how we're doing. Someone asked this weekend, genuinely asked, is it anti-Semitic for me to call for a ceasefire? And it's a hard one because, look, I think we all feel for the Palestinian children just like we feel for the Israeli children. But how do you tackle that one?
I think you're right that it's very hard. And I would actually begin with a few pieces to start that conversation before getting to a ceasefire conversation. I think your point about the suffering of Palestinians, we actually have to understand is very real. Mm-hmm. And I think part of what is challenging here is that we see that the Palestinians who live in Gaza, who are controlled by Hamas, it is hard for us to know who is associated and affiliated with Hamas, who is a bystander and doing nothing, and who truly is innocent. And it's not as if they can show a card or a checklist at some crossing to tell us this. So that's very, very challenging. There was an important piece today in the Free Press that Barry Weiss runs by Joseph Browdy. Joseph Browdy is a former colleague. I highly recommend you read that piece because it's a project he actually was working on way before the horrors of October 7th. But it was a project to share the voices of everyday Palestinians who live in Gaza, who are under a serious autocratic, dictatorial, tyrannical regime, which is Hamas, a terrorist organization. And you then hear very clearly the suffering of many of these Palestinians who live under the control of Hamas. So, Deborah, to that point, it makes it hard. It makes it hard to know, especially when we don't see much of the Palestinian world, not all either from the Palestinian Authority, let alone throughout the Arab world, outright denouncements and condemnations of the terrorism. And as a human, as a mother, of course, when I see that innocent children have lost lives, that there is real pain, that there will be more loss of life, what I find myself saying is that I'm glad that I still feel that pain. Because if I feel that pain, it means that I remain human. It means that I still have humanity inside of me. And it's okay for me to say, at this moment in time, I'm privileging tribalism. I'm privileging my family. I want those Israeli soldiers who are on the ground in Gaza to come home, even if that means that a Palestinian life is going to be taken. And I do not say that easily. I do not say that lightly. We have already seen, since the ground incursion has begun, 19 Israeli soldiers killed. I don't want more soldiers to be killed. And they have a moral obligation to protect Israeli citizenry. So this is the world we are seeing unfold. And this is where it's hard, because when Jews hold real power, which is what Israel is, it is a country that holds real power. That means it has to make impossible ethical and moral choices. Those dilemmas are real. And there's no simple solution. So when we hear people calling for a ceasefire, I understand why they are saying it. They are saying it because they do not want violence to persist. They do not want to see more lives lost. They're not anti-Semitic for saying they want a ceasefire. But what I can tell you is that Israel is not calling for a ceasefire. Israelis are not calling for a ceasefire. It is not an option. It is not an option because deterrence didn't work. And so therefore, Israel has a responsibility to remove as much of the Hamasniks as it possibly can, and then to figure out with others, world leaders, other nation states, who needs to be in that territory in order to actually free Gaza from Hamas, free Palestinians from Hamas. And we don't yet know what the answer to that question is.
Thank you. We are grateful and inspired to have you with us tonight. And while I'd like to hope that we don't have to continue to talk about this, I'm afraid we will have to. And with that, I want to turn the program over to Dov Gordon, who is JNF USA's Israel Programs Admissions Director for Small Communities, and who himself is a member of a small community and the spiritual leader of a small congregation in Williamsport, Pennsylvania. So Dov, this is all yours.
Thank you, Debbie, and thank you, Dr. Fish. It's so wonderful to be with all of you tonight as we continue to come and visit each of your communities. I'm really excited to be able to meet all of you in person soon. I'm currently sitting in a hotel room in upstate South Carolina in the Greenville-Spartanburg area. And a member of this community who's also an alum of Alexander Muss High School in Israel, Jennifer DeBlino, who's also with us tonight, reached out to me on October 8th asking how she could help. She set up a peer-to-peer fundraising page through our website for her community and has been actively raising funds since. I know that in my community of Williamsport, Pennsylvania, this time has been difficult, and I'm often feeling alone. I'm very lucky that I work for such an amazing organization and that my life is basically surrounded by Jewishness, so to speak. But I think about others in my community whose only Jewish friends are their parents, and how isolating it can be to live day to day with these feelings of hurt, confusion, fear, and more, and having no one else to talk with about it. This is why our global conference for Israel in Denver is so important for us living in small communities. Please register today and join over 1,500 fellow JNF USA family members from all over the US and Israel on November 30th through December 3rd, and really feel what it is like to be surrounded by your fellow brothers and sisters. Come to support and be supported. It is so important during times like these. I want to thank all y'all for your support. I want you to know that the Small Communities Department is here for each of you. Please reach out anytime, and please keep up with our emails. We take a lot of pride in crafting each message to try to ensure that we are only sending you information we feel is essential. We appreciate you taking the time to keep up with what is happening in small communities across the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Dov. You heard from Rick about what JNF USA has done and is doing in Israel. You also heard from Dr. Fish about anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism on campuses today. I'd like to thank them both for sharing with us today, for sharing with us today. I thought you might want to hear some personal stories I have heard from my family and friends in Israel. One Israeli mother told me how she is having such difficulties because she has both sons in the IDF. The youngest just started his service in August and is serving in the South. The eldest is 26, got called back as a reservist. He was one of the first to cross into Gaza when we attacked by land. She knows it is their responsibility to serve, despite the fact she is an emotional wreck. She is single-handedly trying to outfit their squads with necessities that the government can't provide, such as socks, shoes, toiletries. Another friend and his family who live in the South have been evacuated with the help of JNF USA. He and his wife are now in a state of depression, and his children are not sleeping unless with their parents. Neither parent has been able to work and function well. The entire family needs PTSD treatment, which in Israel is called resiliency treatment. There are many more all over Israel now dealing with PTSD and trauma, if not all of the population. These are the people that JNF is helping through the resiliency campaign. My parents were Holocaust survivors. The expression of never again was born of the Holocaust. I never thought that kind of Jew hatred would ever rear its head again, but it has. We must help our friends and family in Israel. Now more than ever, we need to help fund the needs in Israel. Kol Yisrael Ravim Zelazeh. All Jews are responsible for one another. Please help and make a donation today. The link to JNF USA's Resiliency Fund is in the chat now. To close tonight's event, we'd like to conclude with a prayer for the state of Israel. Our Father in heaven, rock and redeemer of the people of Israel, bless the state of Israel with its promise of redemption. Shield it with your love. Spread over it with the shelter of your peace. Guide its leaders and advisors with your light and your truth. Help them with your good counsel. Strengthen the hands of those who defend our holy land. Deliver them. Crown their efforts with triumph. Bless the land with peace and its inhabitants with lasting joy. Am Yisrael Chai. Good night.